Hello, my name is Hayden, and with my partners Max and Schwan, we're going to be going over the differences and similarities between the dogfish shark, the mud puppy, and the lamprey, and how it pertains to their integument, differences and similarities and differences between their gills, and then the musculature between the dogfish shark and the mud puppy.
First of all, let's talk about integument. Generally, integumentary system includes the epidermis, dermis, hypodermis, associated glands, and skin appendages. Among them, epidermis and dermis are more important and complex. The vertebrate epidermis is composed of many layers, including some dead cell layers and some germinal layers, glands, and other structures such as hair, feathers, and scales. The dermis is the layer of integument below the epidermis. It consists primarily of connective tissues, but also includes capillaries, lymphatics, small nerve, pigment cells, and the base of glands. However, not absolutely. In a specific example, structures are very different. In this lab, we have lamprey, dogfish shark, and mud puppy as specimens. Here we can see that the surface color of them are very different. We see deeper layer of pigments under dermis. The lamprey has dye material inside, but the mud puppy and shark differ in concentration and distribution of pigments, especially the melanophore. I cut some small pieces off the skin. As you can see, the lamprey has the thickest integument, and the two other samples are thinner. From the outer side, the lamprey and mud puppy are smooth, while the shark has tough scales. From the inner side, we can see some pigments in the lamprey, some connective tissues in mud puppy, and the muscle tissues in the shark. Here we have three pictures from dissecting microscope, which are mud puppy, dogfish shark, and the lamprey from left to right. This can help you to detect the structures and layers of each integument better. More specifically, the lamprey has a simple integument, includes a very thin cuticle layer at the surface, a thick epidermis within unicellular glands and club cells. The club cells are very special in fish, and the dermis develops from mesoderm and neurocrest cells. It's simple and thinner than epidermis in lamprey. That's another difference from shark and mud puppy. And below the dermis are some pigments from the pigment layer. Second, the dogfish shark. As a cartilage fish, the shark has very special skin appendages called placoid scales. These scales grow from dermal layer and cover epidermal layer to protect the body, so they are also named dermal scales. Scales cover the entire surface of shark, and they all grow toward one direction. Because of the scales, the shark has a thin separate epidermis, and these are some mucus glands in epidermis, but not very slimy. The pigments between epidermis and dermis are small, but they do exist. Besides, the dermis is stratified and much thicker than other layers, with muscle tissue attached below. Dermis helps to support the epidermis structurally and physiologically. There is not much complex glands in dogfish shark integument. The last specimen is mud puppy. Different from fish above, mud puppy is an amphibian or a tetrapod. Thus, it has stratum corneum at the surface. Its multilayer epidermis is very thin, so that glands cannot be held there. Both mucus glands and poison glands originate in epidermis, but they invade the dermis and stayed in dermal layer in the end. Those glands are multicellular, and the mucus gland with mucin enclosed, while the poison gland with toxin enclosed. And similar to the shark, mud puppy has chromatophores between epidermis and dermis, or the name as the pigment cells. The dermis is very stratified with stratum spongiosum and the stratum compactum.
So this right here is our lamprey, and what I'd like to start off with is flipping over so we see the external side of the lamprey, and I'd like to point out these 7 different slits right here. What these are the external gill slits of the lamprey. And what makes the lamprey unique compared to any other fish is that it has 2 different modes of respiration, while it's feeding and when it's not feeding. And when the lamprey is feeding, what it does to respirate, water is taken into the external gill slits on the other side right here and taken into the brachial basket right in this region right here. It's unable to see it right now because these gill filaments are in the way, but once water is taken into the brachial basket, these gill filaments actually do gas exchange where O2 is used for respiration. And then what the lamprey does to expel that water is it has this active transport where the muscles contract and water is expelled outwards. And while it's not feeding, it's going to be your basic fish respiration. Water's taken into the oral cavity right here and follows down into the respiratory tube, which is going to be this structure right here. It's a bit hard to see because it's a lot thinner, but it's going to be this right here. This is going to be your respiratory tube. And once water is taken into the respiratory tube, there are small little holes within the respiratory tube. There's one right there. Maybe I could pull it up a little closer. It's a little bit easier to see in person, but there's one right there. That's going to be your internal gill slits. And water is taken into those gill slits, goes through the gill filaments, does gaseous exchange, and just like when it is feeding, muscles contract, expel water through the external gill slits right here. So here we have the dog shark, and one thing I'd like to point out first is the fact that it has a similar respiratory mode compared to the lamprey. So we saw in the lamprey it had a mode while it's feeding and while it wasn't feeding. And it's similar to the shark because here we see that the shark has gills right here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 slits in the front. Well, also, if you notice right here, this small little slit right next to the eye, that's going to be the shark's spiracle. And when the shark is feeding, it takes in water for gas exchange through the spiracle, and actually you can see the entrance to the spiracle right here. And that's where gas exchange occurs when the shark is feeding. While we're inside the mouth, we might as well take a look at the oral cavity, which will be right around here. The pharynx region right around here, which helps with digestion and respiration. Also, the internal gill slits right here corresponding to the ones outside. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 in there. Also, another thing about the shark is that notice how it has this right here, which you would assume where the tongue would be. However, sharks don't necessarily have a true tongue. It's more of a base where other tetrapods' tongues develop. Another thing I'd like to point out about the shark is the homodont teeth again. The homodont teeth, of course, mean that they are all the same, meaning they are the same size, same shape. They don't vary in their different ways. They are all the same small teeth right around here. And going back into the gills, we can see the internal gills right here, where the gill rackers and the gill lamellae are. Gill lamellae will be a lot harder to see, however, it is in there. It'll be right within this region right here, where the internal gill slits are once again, and that's where gaseous exchange is going to occur, where the shark can take in water for oxygen. So right here we have the mud puppy, and once again, similar to the shark and the lamprey, it has two types of respiratory modes, except when we take a look inside the mouth of the mud puppy, you can notice like right here there's a small little hole, and that is going to be the mud puppy's glottis. And what the glottis does is it takes water into the mouth, and it goes through the gills right here and performs gaseous exchange in order to get O2 flowing for the mud puppy to breathe. Going back on the outside, we can see that the mud puppy has its external gills right here, following right here, and of course, just like the shark, the internal gill slits will be right in here, along with the gill rackers to collect food particles and avoid choking. And going in here, we can see the esophagus and the bronchi, where O2 is taken into the lungs in order for the mud puppy to breathe.
Hello, my name is Hayden, and lastly, I will be talking about the musculature of sharks and mud puppies. I should mention that there are many similarities as well as differences between these two animals. First off, I should mention that muscles help facilitate movement throughout the body, helps regulate procedures such as controlling heartbeat, breathing, and digestion. Mainly, we should be talking about which muscles help facilitate breathing throughout these specimens, the shark and the mud puppy. In the shark, the respiratory system features a pump system. The heart, which features cardiac muscle, pumps unoxygenated blood to the gills for oxygenation, and then from there, oxygenated blood is distributed to the body. Similarly, as in the mud puppy, we'll look at in which we'll look at in a moment. Gas exchange also takes place in the skin for the shark, but primarily in the gills. When the pharynx is filled, the mouth closes and the gill chambers expand and fill with water. First, I'll be talking about the branchial side of the fish, and then probably the hypobranchial side. On the brachial side, we have the adductor mandibulae. This is used to help close the jaw. And another structure pretty close to it that's right there is the preorbitalis, and it also helps with closing the jaw, or the lower jaw, I should mention, not the upper jaw. A couple other muscles I should mention is the levator palato-quadrati and the spiracularis, which help raise the upper jaw. And Finally, for the branchial side, we have the intermandibularis, which raises the floor of the mouth. Then we flip over the fish, and on the hypobranchial side, we have this structure called the coramandibularis, which helps open the lower jaw. One other muscle that I should mention is the dorsal constrictors, and they are important because they compress the gill pouches, which then kicks out water. Eventually the gill slits open via muscles, and the chambers constrict to flush out the water. The oxygen-rich water flows into the, as we learned, the countercurrent pattern to the blood, and allows for efficient oxygen and CO2 exchange to take place. The mud puppy has 3 modes of respiration. They have gills, lungs, and skin. Oxygen and carbon dioxide can be released through the skin of these mud puppies, but their main use of respiration comes through the gills, and they actually account for most of his breathing. And then they also have lungs, interestingly enough, they developed allowing for the animal to breathe on land. The mud puppy does not have some of the structures that the shark has, which makes sense when you think about it because of their different mode of respiration. However, they do share some common structures. A couple homologous structures include the adductor mandibulae and the intermandibularis, which makes sense because, I mean, they still got to open their mouth to possibly breathe out their lungs, and even maybe eat, just to open their mouth. However, the mud puppy is lacking the spiracularis, which, I mean, it can make sense why they're missing a couple muscles that the shark has that they don't. I think that has to do with probably the fact that the shark has to open its mouth very, very wide for the suction pump to work. They need to get in as much water because water isn't very oxygen rich. But I guess the mud puppy doesn't have to do that, so that might be why they're lacking some of the muscles. I guess, and they also have an advantage when it comes to having 3 different ways to breathe, which is advantageous in that sense, having 3 different ways to breathe. You can't drown on land and can't drown in water, so that's good. And in that case, they don't need as many muscles to respire.